Hello everyone, this is Sarfraz from Aristotle Prep, and we are looking at passage 11 from the OG13 RC chapter. This has questions 45 to 51. So we will first read the passage as always. I will explain the passage to you in great detail, the way I would have if I were attempting the passage myself. We will then predict the purpose of the passage, and then we will go to the questions. So the first sentence of the passage is always very, very important. In this case, okay, the bracket says it's adapted from an article, okay, fine. But the first sentence of the passage is, some observers have attributed the dramatic growth in temporary employment that occurred in the United States during the 1980s to increased participation in the workforce by certain groups, such as first-time or re-entering workers who supposedly prefer such arrangements. The first sentence is always very important. This is a long first sentence. In case you haven't got it, read it again. The first sentence is the only sentence I recommend reading twice or thrice, but get it. So, if you read it again, it basically says that some people, some observers, some people, they have attributed the dramatic growth in temporary employment. So, we know that in the US in 1980s, there was a dramatic growth in temporary employment, and some people have said that the reason for this is an increase in the number of first-time or re-entering workers who prefer such arrangements. That's basically the first sentence for you. However means a contrast. So now a differing point of view will come in. However, statistical analysis reveal that demographic changes in the workforce did not correlate with variations in the total number of temporary workers. Okay. Instead, these analyses suggest that factors affecting employers account for the rise in temporary employment. So you see, there's a contrast now. Some people thought that it is a particular group of workers who preferred temporary employment, but statistical analysis shows that it's actually employers and not employees who prefer such arrangement. So one factor is product demand. Temporary employment is favored by employers who are adapting to fluctuating demand for products while at the same time seeking to reduce overall labor cost. Obviously makes sense because if your demand is very unreliable, then if the demand goes down and you have a lot of labor on your roles, you will end up incurring a huge salary cost. So temporary arrangements work best for such companies. So another factor is labor's reduced bargaining strength, which allows employers more control over the terms of employment. Okay. Given the analysis which revealed that growth in temporary employment now far exceeds the level explainable by recent workforce entry rates of groups said to prefer temporary jobs. Okay. So according to analysis, the number of workers in temporary employment we have now far exceeds what should have been the case had it only been those first time or re-entering workers taking up these jobs. So given this analysis, firms should be discouraged from creating excessive numbers of temporary positions. Now this is the author talking to you. So basically the key takeaway is the author is suggesting that firms should now cut down on the number of temporary positions. Government policymakers should consider mandating benefit coverage for temporary employees, promoting pay equity between temporary and permanent workers, assisting labor unions in organizing temporary workers, and encouraging firms to assign temporary jobs primarily to employees who explicitly indicate that preference. And finally, in the last sentence, the author makes a few suggestions that the government should take up, all to safeguard temporary workers or for the benefit of temporary workers. So the entire passage, if I have to summarize, is talking about the reason why there has been a growth in temporary employment in the US. Some people thought it's because of the workers' preference, but statistics shows that it's because of employers' preference. It gives a couple of reasons why employers prefer temporary workers, and then the author goes on to say that it is not a good idea to have so many temporary workers, and the government should step in and do a few things about it. So, if I have to think of the main purpose, I can't say it's totally neutral because, again, in the end, the author does say that the government should step in and control these temporary employment positions. So, it's not a totally neutral passage. The author is a little against temporary employment, if you will, or against the tendency of employers to hire only or largely temporary workers. So with that thought process, I will now look at the questions and start with the first one, which is the primary purpose question. So I will again look at the first words: present, explain, identify, outline, describe. Everything could work. So the first word doesn't help me. I will read all the options now. A says, present the results of statistical analysis and propose further studies. Never proposes anything. So out. B says, explain a recent development and predict its eventual consequences. I don't think so. Nowhere. I think both the parts are wrong. C says, identify the reasons for a trend and recommend measures to address it. Identify reasons is correct, but recommend measures, I don't know. Okay, I'll hold on to C. D says, outline several theories about a phenomenon and advocate one of them. Never advocates anything. E says, describe the potential consequences of implementing a new policy and argue in favor of that policy is wrong. So then I'll go back to C. C says, identify the reasons for a trend, which it definitely does. Why is there a trend of increase in temporary employment? And recommend measures to address it. Actually, it does that also. The last part where the government should do this is to basically address or control the increase in temporary employment. So C summarizes the passage best and should be the answer to the question.